Good morning, listeners, and welcome to yet another podcast brought to you by Legis Indica. Today, we're diving deep into a really interesting Supreme Court judgment. It's Sunil Kumar Singh v. Bihar Legislative Council, 2025 INSC 264, came out on February 25th, 2025.
And it was Justices Surya Kant and Nangmukapam K. Singh who delivered this one.
Yeah, and it really gets you thinking, doesn't it, about, the balance between the courts and the legislature.
Absolutely. It really puts a spotlight on some pretty fundamental questions, like when can the courts actually intervene in what goes on inside a legislature?
Right.
Can they look at decisions from something like an ethics committee? And maybe most importantly, are there limits to how a legislature can punish its own members?
Okay, so boiling it down, this deep dive is about an MLC that's a member of the Legislative Council in Bihar. Sunil Kumar Singh from the RJD.
Right.
He got expelled by the Bihar Legislative Council, the BLC. And we need to unpack why the Supreme Court stepped in and, what they decided about it.
Exactly. The court first had to figure out if they could even hear the case, because legislatures usually have some protection from courts looking over their shoulder, Article 212(1) and all that. Then, if they could hear it, could they actually say the punishment, the expulsion was, well, too much, disproportionate?
And even take it a step further, could they change the punishment themselves?
Yeah, that was the big question, too. Lots to unpack there.
Definitely. So, okay, before we get into the court's thinking, let's set the scene. What actually happened in the Bihar Legislative Council to kick all this off?
It goes back to the governor's address, February 13th, 2024. Mr. Sunil Kumar Singh and another MLC, Emlyn Sohab, were accused of being, well, pretty disruptive.
Disruptive how?
The accusation was using derogatory slogans and apparently even mimicking the chief minister. So things that were seen as really undermining the dignity of the House.
Okay, that sounds serious in that context. What happened next? Was there a formal process?
Yes. A formal complaint was filed pretty quickly on February 19th. The chairman of the BLC then referred the whole thing to the Ethics Committee. That's their internal body for handling member conduct issues.
And the Ethics Committee started an inquiry.
They did. They set up an initial meeting for May 3rd, 2024.
Did both MLCs show up?
Well, Imran Saab, the other MLT, he attended that meeting. And apparently, he expressed regret for what happened.
Okay, but not Sunil Kumar Singh.
No, Mr. Singh didn't attend. He asked for several postponements, citing Lok Sabha election work, other commitments. He eventually did appear before the committee, but that was later, on June 12th, 2024.
Okay. So he finally appeared. Did that resolve things?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
It seems instead of tackling the charges head-on, Mr. Singh actually challenged the committee's authority to even investigate him.
Oh, interesting. So he questioned their jurisdiction.
Seems like it. And then something quite significant happened procedurally. The Ethics Committee had a meeting scheduled for June 19th, but they moved it earlier to June 14th.
Moved it earlier. Was Mr. Singh told about this change?
And that's the key point. No, he wasn't informed about the date change. So they went ahead, concluded their inquiry on the 14th, without him having notice of that specific meeting.
That sounds like it could be a problem. What did the committee decide in that June 14th meeting?
On that same day, June 14th, they put out their report. And the recommendations were starkly different for the two MLCs. They recommended full expulsion for Sunil Kumar Singh.
Expulsion? Wow. And for Emlyn
For Emlyn Sohab, who had expressed regret earlier, they recommended a suspension for a limited period.
And did the full Bihar Legislative Council accept these recommendations?
Yes, they did. On July 26, 2024, the BLC adopted the Ethics Committee's report. So Mr. Singh was formally expelled and Mr. Sohab was suspended.
And the paperwork followed, notification issued.
Immediately, same day, July 26th, the BLC Secretariat issued the official notification saying Mr. Singh was no longer a member.
Okay. Now, while all this legal challenge was brewing, you mentioned something about an election.
Right. Because Mr. Singh's seat was now technically vacant due to the expulsion, the Election Commission of India stepped in. On December 30th, 2024, they announced a by-election for that seat. The plan was to wrap it up by January 25th, 2025.
But the Supreme Court got involved before the result.
Exactly. The Supreme Court issued a stay order on January 15th, 2025. They specifically stopped the declaration of the by-election result while they considered Mr. Singh's case.
Right, okay. So that brings us neatly to the Supreme Court's final decision. After considering everything, what did they rule on the expulsion itself?
The bottom line, the Supreme Court quashed the expulsion. The two-judge bench, with Justice Kant writing the judgment, found that expelling Mr. Sunil Kumar Singh was disproportionate and excessive in these circumstances.
Disproportionate and excessive. Okay, now this is where we need to dig in. How do they justify intervening? I mean, what about Article 212? Doesn't that usually keep courts out of legislative proceeding?
That's the absolute core of the legal reasoning here. The court really clarified how Article 212.1 works. They said, yes, it protects the internal legislative process, the debates, the motions, how votes are conducted from being challenged in court just because of some, procedural slip-up.
Okay, so the day-to-day mechanics are protected.
Right. But, and this is the crucial part, they said Article 212.1 doesn't give the legislature a blank check. It doesn't shield their decisions or administrative actions from judicial review if those actions break the law or the Constitution.
So a distinction between proceedings like debates and decisions like, say, an expulsion order.
Precisely. The court looked at the Ethics Committee's recommendation for expulsion and said, well, that looks more like an administrative function. It's done under rules made using Article 208, aimed at discipline, not really a core legislative proceeding, that Article 212.1 is meant to shield from scrutiny over its legality.
That's a really important point. So even legislatures aren't totally immune if their decisions potentially violate rights or constitutional limits.
Exactly. The court basically reaffirmed a fundamental principle. Legislative actions can be reviewed by courts if they violate fundamental rights, lack constitutional backing, or are just plain arbitrary. And in this specific case, they highlighted that expulsion hits fundamental rights, the members' rights, sure, but also the broader idea of representative democracy. So judicial review was necessary.
Okay, that makes sense how they got past the Article 212 hurdle. Which brings us to the next big question, proportionality. How did they decide expulsion was too much? What standards did they apply?
Right. The court explicitly said that constitutional courts can review the proportionality of punishments handed down by legislatures. They explained that proportionality means the punishment has to be, well, necessary, balanced, and basically the least severe option that still achieves the goal, in this case, discipline.
And expulsion is obviously at the extreme end of that scale.
Absolutely. The court stressed that expulsion is incredibly severe. It effectively kicks out an elected representative and silences the people who voted for them. So it should only be used in really exceptional, serious cases, always considering that impact on democratic representation.
Did the court lay out specific things they looked at to judge proportionality here?
Yes, they did. They mentioned several factors. How much did the conduct actually disrupt the House? Did it genuinely harm the House's dignity? What was the members' behavior like before and after? Did they show any remorse? That seemed relevant, especially comparing Mr. Singh and Mr. Sohaib. Were there less drastic punishments available? And, critically, balancing the need for order against the electorate's right to be represented.
It sounds like a real balancing act, weighing the House's internal needs against broader democratic values.
It is. And while the court said, we respect the legislature's autonomy, they also made it clear that courts have to step in if a punishment is clearly way over the top, or as they put it, if it shocks constitutional conscience.
Okay, so they found the expulsion disproportionate. But then they went further. They didn't just quash it and send it back, did they? They actually modified the punishment themselves. How did they justify doing that?
That's where Article 142 comes in. Normally, yes, a court finding a punishment flawed would send it back to the BLC to reconsider. But Article 142 gives the Supreme Court this unique, broad power to make any order needed for complete justice in a specific case. It's reserved for exceptional situations.
And they felt this was one of those exceptional situations. Why not send it back?
Their reasoning was mainly about time and fairness. They figured sending it back would just cause more delays. Mr. Singh had already been out for about 7 months. His term wasn't that long anyway, ending in 2026. More delay would mean less time to actually represent his constituents, potentially violating his Article 14 rights equality before the law.
I see. So to cut through the delay and achieve what they saw as justice now, they used Article 142.
Exactly. They basically said, okay, he's already been out for 7 months. Let's treat that period he already served as expulsion as if it were a suspension. And they deemed that period of suspension to be a proportionate punishment for the original misconduct.
So the outcome was immediate reinstatement.
Yes. They ordered him reinstated as an MLC right away.
Were there any strings attached, like back pay or anything?
Oh, good question. No. The court was very specific. He couldn't claim any salary or benefits for the time he was expelled. And they also added a strong caveat. Modifying the punishment didn't mean they approved of his original behavior. They basically warned him about future conduct.
Right, so a clear message there. And the by-election that was underway, what happened to that?
Well, Since the whole reason for the by-election, the vacancy, disappeared once he was reinstated, the election itself became redundant. So the Supreme Court also formally quashed the Election Commission's notification that it announced the by-election. That whole process was nullified.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the main takeaways for you listening. What are the big lessons from this Sunil Kumar Singh judgment?
I think there are a few key things. First, it really clarifies that courts can review legislative actions, especially when they impact fundamental rights or constitutional boundaries, even internal disciplinary ones. Article 212(1) isn't an absolute shield.
Right. Judicial review has limits, but it exists.
Exactly. Second, the principle of proportionality is crucial when legislatures punish members. Expulsion is a really big deal and needs exceptional justification, considering the impact on democracy.
It has to fit the crime, so to speak, and consider the voters.
Precisely. Third, it shows the Supreme Court using its Article 142 power quite proactively to provide what it sees as complete and timely justice, even if that means deviating from the standard procedure of remanding the case.
A powerful tool, used carefully.
Well, hopefully. And finally, I guess the overarching point is about that constant tension and balance in our Constitution between letting the legislature manage its affairs and ensuring the judiciary can step in to protect rights and uphold the Constitution. This case is a great example of that balancing act in action.
That's a fantastic summary. It really shows how this case touches on some core principles of how our system of government works, the checks and balances involved.
Definitely. It makes you think about where those lines are drawn between legislative freedom and judicial oversight. A really significant judgment.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more updates on key Supreme Court decisions.